so grateful that we can study together. I like to read excerpts, as you know, from different books, different writers, and it's great to see you all. Mary Jane, great to see you. Gabe, great to see you come in. And I like to read excerpts from these books. This is from Faith, Hope, and Charity, written by P.F. Driver out of the Paducah, Kentucky church. John the Baptist came preaching. This is page 46. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Jesus also preached the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of Christ, or the kingdom of God. Peter called it the kingdom of Christ. That kingdom was born at Pentecost. We know that a kingdom consists of a king, a people to rule over, and a territory. That makes up a kingdom, the king's domain. The kingdom of heaven is unique from all others. Jesus is that king, his obedient people and his subjects, and the territory is in the hearts of men, making up a kingdom. Jesus said, the Holy Ghost is with you, shall be in you. It is the kingdom of heaven because it came from heaven. Luke tells us in Acts 2 and 2 that the kingdom of Satan are from beneath. Jesus told the unbelievers, I'm from above, you are from beneath. The phrase kingdom of heaven confuses many people because they think the word heaven always applies to the fixed abode of the saints. There are at least 3 heavens. Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 12 that he was one time caught up to the 3rd heaven, Ephesians 2 and 6, and has raised us up together and made over there are at least 3 heavens. Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 12 that at one time he was caught up to the 3rd heaven. Ephesians 2 and 6, and has raised us up together and made us to sit together in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. Then Jesus said in Matthew 24:35, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Which heaven and which earth will pass away? Not the firmament, the moon, stars, and so on. Nor the good earth that we walk upon. God made all these, and he said it was good. All that God made was good, and he will not destroy the good. Spiritual heaven, which was created on the day of Pentecost, is here among the earthly kingdoms of this world. Jesus said, you are in the world, but not of the world. Peter called the earthly kingdoms or systems elements that shall be burned up. All the evil works of men shall be destroyed. Good reading. A lot of thoughts stir up in your mind on just that one page, written by Brother P.F. Driver. I'd like to share that with you. Last week, we got a couple of sayings in here before I go into the Word. They're always good. I believe the family was established long before the church, and my duty is to my family. I'm not to neglect my family, but I'm also not to neglect my spiritual family. For the spiritual family is when you're born again. You may find hundreds of fault finders among professed Christians, but all their criticism will not lead one solitary soul to Christ. I never preached a sermon yet that I could not pick to pieces and find fault with. I feel that Jesus Christ ought to have a far better representative than I am. But I have lived long enough to discover that there's nothing perfect in the world or in this world. And if you wait to find a perfect preacher, a perfect meeting, I'm afraid you will have to wait till the millennium arrives. What we want to be looking up, what we want is to be looking up to Christ. Let us be done with fault finding. I thought that's pretty good to remember. We can remember that and that saying. So we're now going into last week. We were in the study of denying the Lord, and we used Revelations 3 and 8 and 2 Corinthians 11, 3 to 4, and 1 John 2 and 9 and 11, and then Matthew 6, 22, 23. But tonight, we are going to divert ourselves a little bit from that. I'm going to share with you the discussion that we had in Springdale, Arkansas. One day we had it just evolved into a day's discussion among the ministers, and fulfilled the order of 1 Corinthians 14, let the prophets speak by two, the most three, and if anything be revealed to him that sitteth by, let the first hold his peace. So we had that Friday. We had an interesting insight presented by one of the ministers, in which was completely reverse to what we teach and believe and have taught and believed here in the local church for many years. It's always good to hear something new and to examine it and compare it. The subject was the bride of Christ and the man-child, and the multitude without number in Revelation 7. The viewpoint of this minister was, he lives in Missouri, that Revelation 12, and let's go there because we'll need to get this to compare. Revelation 12, it deals with a woman and a man-child and the remnant and the dragon and his angels, and Michael and his angels in Revelation 12. So I think it's a very it's a very needed understanding of the scriptures if our message of the bride is valid. And if you don't know what we teach on the bride of Christ, then you should ask questions tonight, and we'll discuss it, because it's important you know what we teach in this local church on the bride of Christ and on the man-child and the remnant and Michael and his angels, dragon and his angels. Revelation 12, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. I picture a woman, and the sun is her clothing, her apparel. She's in brilliancy of the sun. The brilliance of the sun is shining out from her. And she has a moon, the moon, picture the moon under her feet. So she must be standing on the moon. Here's a woman standing upon the moon, and she's burning with fire of the sun, and then on her head is a crown. She's crowned with 12 stars. The viewpoint of this brother was that this bride was the woman that came from the day of Pentecost, the church, that is still the church today. And the bride is the church. The church is the bride. Now, this is not an uncommon teaching, that part of it, because most of the known ecclesiastical church world in their teachings teach the bride and the church as being one. The church is the bride is the church. They vary a little bit in their understanding of it, but that's the main thing they teach. The whole church is the bride of Christ. And they believe that when Christ comes, he will just simply come for the church, the raptured church. It will become the raptured church. It will become the glorious church. Hello. How are you, Sister Christine?
Well, I ain't gonna stay. I'll be here the way it's natural. I can bring you. Put this in your house.
In my house?
Yeah. Or in the church, you can keep it. In the church, in the back.
All right. Well, you need it? Something in there you need?
No, I brought it to you. That's the soldier dog.
Well, bless your heart. And this is an offering you bet there.
But I'll be on Wednesday night. I love y'all.
Well, we love you too.
Oh, thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Christine. The bracelet. Soldier of God. The bracelet said. I don't know what is in there. But life is beautiful, isn't it? It's full of surprises. You just never know.
You don't.
And with Sister Christine, you never know. That's for certain. But the woman then becomes the glorious church, but the bride and the woman here in Revelation 12 are the same. They teach, this minister teaches that the man-child became the Gentile church that the woman delivered, and the man-child is still in existence today, being made up of the overcomers that come from the church. And the church produces that. The church, but the man-child is separate. And while we don't vary in some degrees from that understanding, but we do vary a great deal from the total understanding. Now, why would we understand that this woman in Revelation 12 would not be the bride? Because the church that came out on the day of Pentecost, in Acts the 2nd chapter, which consisted of the 12 apostles and about 120 total of the disciples, could not have been the bride of Christ, or could not have been that perfected church that would be called the bride, or would be clothed in linen. And Christ did not marry that church, the 120. There was no marriage that took place on the day of Pentecost. Rather, that was a woman, and that was a wonder that appeared in heaven. And the church that we are visualizing and picturing as a glorious church would be far beyond just the woman that came out on the day of Pentecost. And this woman in Revelations 12 is the church, but not the bride. She doesn't, this is not the overcomers that will constitute the bride of Christ. But what she produced becomes the bride. It is termed a man-child in Revelations 12. And she, being with child, verse 2, travailing in birth and pained to be delivered. She did have pregnancy or life inception and conception with Christ in the early church. She was clothed with the sun, the New Testament. She did have the law, the moon, under her feet. Her headship was 12 stars, or 12, she was crowned with that, 12 stars, 12 apostles. She produced part of the bride of Christ, termed the man-child. The man-child. It was a child of Christ, coming a man-child, from the man-child, the Son of Man, Christ, and the conception with the church. And she brought that forth in the early reign. In the early reign of the early church, the man-child was born, that is the part of the overcomers that made up the bride, the overcomers of sin, imperfection in their life, and they were caught up to God and the throne when she delivered them. She delivered them in the early church of the 42-year period of the dispensation of the early church up until the time of John the Revelator. She was still delivering the man-child. And I'm sure John was part of the man-child, because John was caught up in the Spirit on the Lord's day. There may have been perhaps a remnant group right after John, but not long after the church plunged completely into the wilderness. Went from a white horse to a red horse in Revelation 6. Okay, I want to go slow in this so you ask questions, you'll be sure to get it. Sister Carol, did you have a question?
My question was, can we say that as long as there was a white horse, she was bringing forth? But then you went and said that, so.
Right, the white horse would have to produce the overcomers, because from the red horse, that was the martyrdom in the church of those that were delivered in martyrdom, and the white and the red state produced the overcomers. But by the time the black horse came, there were no overcomers. They were not any bride material being brought forth. And there was still children of God. There was still a remnant that God remembered. But the man-child was not being brought forth. He was caught up to God and the throne. And I'm sure that God always has had someone